The grand ballroom of Buckingham Palace had never looked more magnificent. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across the polished marble floors, while hundreds of distinguished guests mingled beneath portraits of long-dead monarchs. Tonight was meant to be a celebration of the monarchy's enduring strength, a charity gala that would raise millions for causes close to the royal family's heart. Charles stood near the ornate fireplace, his formal dress uniform perfectly pressed, medals gleaming under the warm light. At 75, he carried himself with the dignified bearing that decades of royal duty had instilled in him. Camilla moved gracefully through the crowd nearby, her emerald green gown catching the light as she spoke with various dignitaries and donors. As queen consort, she had grown into her role with remarkable ease, her warm laugh and genuine interest in others making her a natural at these social gatherings. She paused occasionally to adjust her diamond tiara, a family heirloom that had been specially reset for tonight's occasion. Across the room, Kate stood surrounded by a small group of young entrepreneurs she had been mentoring through her various charitable initiatives. Her navy blue dress was elegant yet understated, perfectly suited to her role as Princess of Wales. At 41, she had matured into a confident and respected member of the royal family, her early nervousness long since replaced by genuine warmth and natural grace. She listened intently as a young woman described her plans to start a sustainable fashion company, Kate's eyes lighting up with genuine interest and encouragement. The evening had begun like countless others before it. Charles had delivered a brief but heartfelt speech about the importance of supporting emerging talent in British business and the arts. The crowd had applauded warmly, champagne flutes had been raised in toast, and the familiar rhythm of royal entertaining had settled over the gathering like a comfortable blanket. Nobody could have predicted what would happen in the next few moments. Lord Patterson, an elderly gentleman who had known Charles since his university days, approached the king with a warm smile. Behind him walked Lady Patterson, a woman Charles remembered fondly from various social gatherings over the decades. They had been discussing the success of tonight's fundraising efforts when Lord Patterson made an innocent observation that would change everything. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice carrying the refined accent of old British nobility. "Might I say how lovely the Queen Consort looks tonight? That shade of green is absolutely stunning on her." He gestured toward where he believed Camilla to be standing, near a group of art collectors examining a newly acquired painting. Charles smiled warmly and nodded, following Lord Patterson's gesture. In the soft lighting and amid the movement of the crowd, he caught sight of what he assumed was Camilla's distinctive silhouette. The emerald green fabric of her dress was clearly visible, and her elegant posture was unmistakable. Without hesitation, Charles began moving through the crowd toward his wife, intending to join the conversation she was having. As he approached, Charles could see that she was engaged in what appeared to be a deep discussion with several people. Her back was turned to him, and she seemed completely absorbed in whatever topic they were exploring. Charles felt a familiar warmth in his chest as he watched her animated gestures, the way she leaned slightly forward when she was particularly interested in what someone was saying. After all these years together, he still found himself drawn to her natural charisma and genuine interest in others. The crowd seemed to part naturally before him as he made his way across the ballroom. Several guests nodded respectfully or offered brief greetings, but Charles was focused on reaching Camilla. He had been away from her side for nearly an hour, caught up in conversations with various ministers and foreign dignitaries, and he found himself looking forward to rejoining her company. As Charles drew closer, he could hear the animated discussion more clearly. The voices were talking about education reform and its impact on disadvantaged communities, a topic both he and Camilla felt passionate about. He smiled to himself, thinking how typical it was of his wife to find the most substantive conversation in a room full of small talk and social pleasantries. When Charles was just a few steps away, he reached out his hand, intending to place it gently on what he believed was Camilla's shoulder. It was a gesture he had made thousands of times before, a simple, affectionate touch that would announce his presence and his desire to join the conversation. His fingers were just inches from the emerald fabric when the woman turned around. The shock that hit Charles was immediate and profound. Instead of Camilla's familiar face, he found himself looking directly into Kate's startled blue eyes. Time seemed to freeze as the reality of the situation crashed over him. Kate's expression showed equal surprise, her conversation stopping mid-sentence as she registered the king's unexpected approach and the intimate nature of his gesture. The small group surrounding Kate fell silent, sensing that something significant had just occurred even if they couldn't quite identify what it was. Charles's hand hung frozen in the air for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a second or two. His mind raced to process what had happened and how to respond appropriately. Kate, with the quick thinking and grace that had served her well throughout her royal career, was the first to recover. She offered a warm smile and a slight curtsy, her voice steady despite the unusual circumstances. "Your Majesty," she said softly, "what a lovely surprise. Were you looking for someone?" Charles felt heat rising in his cheeks as he realized the implications of what had just occurred. In the soft lighting and with the similar colors of their dresses, he had completely mistaken Kate for Camilla. The intimate nature of his intended gesture, combined with the very public setting, created a situation that could easily be misinterpreted by anyone who had witnessed it. "I do apologize," Charles said, his voice carefully controlled despite his inner turmoil. "I thought you were someone else entirely. The lighting in here can be quite deceiving." He attempted a smile, hoping to diffuse any awkwardness with humor, but he could see in Kate's eyes that she understood exactly who he had mistaken her for. The small group around them had begun to disperse, perhaps sensing the private nature of the moment, or perhaps simply responding to the subtle tension that had suddenly filled the air. Kate maintained her composure beautifully, but Charles could see a slight flush in her cheeks that suggested she was as affected by the incident as he was. From across the room, several people had noticed the interaction. Lord Patterson, who had inadvertently caused the confusion with his gesture, watched with growing concern as he realized his mistake. Lady Worthington, a sharp-eyed socialite known for her keen observation skills, had paused her own conversation to study the scene unfolding near the art collection. Even from a distance, she could sense that something unusual was happening. Charles attempted to recover his composure by engaging Kate in normal conversation, asking about her charitable work and the success of her recent initiatives. Kate responded with her usual warmth and intelligence, but both of them were acutely aware that the dynamic between them had shifted in some indefinable way. The innocent mistake had created a moment of unexpected intimacy that neither had been prepared for. As they spoke, Charles found himself noticing things about Kate that he had somehow overlooked before. The way her eyes lit up when she spoke about causes she cared about, the graceful way she moved her hands when she explained something she was passionate about, the genuine warmth in her smile when she looked directly at him. These observations troubled him deeply, not because they were inappropriate in themselves, but because of the timing and context in which they were occurring. Kate, for her part, was experiencing her own confused emotions. The moment when she had turned to find Charles so close, his hand reaching toward her with such gentle familiarity, had affected her more than she wanted to admit. She had always respected and admired her father-in-law, but tonight she was seeing him in a different light, as a man rather than just as the king or William's father. The conversation continued for several more minutes, both of them working hard to maintain normalcy while processing what had just happened. They discussed Kate's upcoming trip to visit schools in northern England, Charles's recent meetings with environmental ministers, and the success of tonight's fundraising efforts. To any casual observer, it would have appeared to be a perfectly normal interaction between the king and the Princess of Wales. However, beneath the surface, both Charles and Kate were grappling with unexpected emotions and realizations. The simple case of mistaken identity had somehow opened a door that neither of them had known existed, revealing depths of connection and attraction that had previously remained hidden or unacknowledged. As their conversation began to wind down, Charles became increasingly aware that they needed to separate and return to their respective duties as hosts of the evening. Yet he found himself reluctant to leave Kate's side, drawn by a newfound appreciation for her company that went beyond their family relationship or their shared royal duties. Kate seemed to sense his reluctance to leave, and she too felt an unexpected desire to prolong their interaction. The easy conversation, the way he listened so intently to her ideas and opinions, the genuine interest he showed in her work, all of it combined to create a connection that felt both comfortable and thrilling. Finally, duty and propriety demanded that they part. Charles excused himself with appropriate formality, but not before their eyes met one more time in a look that acknowledged, without words, that something fundamental had changed between them. Kate watched as he moved away through the crowd, her heart beating faster than the situation seemed to warrant. As Charles made his way back across the ballroom, his mind was in turmoil. He tried to tell himself that what had just happened was simply an embarrassing case of mistaken identity, nothing more. But he could not shake the memory of Kate's startled blue eyes, the warmth of her smile, or the easy flow of their conversation. More troubling still was his growing awareness that his feelings toward his daughter-in-law were becoming complicated in ways he had never anticipated. The rest of the evening passed in a haze of necessary social interactions. Charles performed his duties as host, speaking with donors and dignitaries, posing for photographs, and maintaining the pleasant facade that royal occasions demanded. But, throughout it all, he found his eyes seeking out Kate across the room, watching as she moved gracefully through her own social obligations. Camilla, when he finally located her in a completely different part of the ballroom, wearing a burgundy dress rather than emerald green, seemed to notice his distracted state. She asked if he was feeling well, her concern genuine and loving. Charles assured her that he was fine, just tired from a long day. But he could see that she wasn't entirely convinced by his explanation. The days following the charity gala passed with agonizing slowness for Charles. Every morning brought the same routine of official duties, ceremonial obligations, and endless meetings with government ministers and foreign ambassadors. Yet beneath the familiar rhythm of royal life, something had fundamentally shifted. The memory of that moment with Kate played on an endless loop in his mind, refusing to be dismissed or rationalized away. Charles found himself analyzing every detail of their interaction with the precision of a scholar studying an ancient text. The surprise in her eyes, the flush in her cheeks, the way her voice had remained steady despite the unusual circumstances, all of it suggested that she had been affected by the moment as much as he had. This realization both thrilled and terrified him in equal measure. At breakfast 3 days after the gala, Camilla noticed his distracted state had not improved. She sat across from him in their private dining room at Clarence's house, the morning newspapers spread before them, as was their custom. Charles stared at the same page of the Times for nearly 10 minutes without reading a single word, his coffee growing cold in his cup. "Darling," Camilla said gently, folding her own newspaper and setting it aside. "You've seemed quite distant since Tuesday evening. Did something happen at the gala that's troubling you?" Charles looked up from his unread newspaper, meeting his wife's concerned gaze. Camilla's face showed only love and worry, her eyes searching his for some explanation of his unusual behavior. The guilt that washed over him was immediate and overwhelming. How could he explain that he couldn't stop thinking about another woman, especially when that woman was their daughter-in-law? "I'm quite all right," Charles said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Just preoccupied with some pressing matters of state. Nothing for you to worry about." The lie tasted bitter in his mouth, but he could see no alternative that wouldn't cause tremendous pain to the woman who had stood by him through so much. Camilla studied his face for a long moment, her intuition telling her that there was more to his distraction than affairs of government. After decades of marriage to Charles, she had learned to read his moods and expressions with remarkable accuracy. Something was definitely troubling him, something more personal than political pressure or royal duties. "Charles," she said softly, reaching across the table to place her hand over his. "We've been together too long for me not to notice when something is really bothering you. If you don't want to talk about it now, I understand. But please don't shut me out completely." The warmth and understanding in her voice only deepened Charles's guilt. Camilla deserved so much better than a husband whose thoughts were consumed by another woman. He squeezed her hand gently, trying to convey through touch what he couldn't express in words. "You're right, of course," he admitted. "There is something on my mind, but it's quite complicated. I need some time to sort through it myself before I can discuss it properly." This was as close to honesty as he dared come, and he hoped it would satisfy her concern without forcing him to reveal the truth. Camilla nodded slowly, accepting his explanation while clearly remaining unconvinced that it told the whole story. She had survived decades in the public eye by learning when to push and when to give people space. This seemed like a moment that called for patience rather than pressure. Meanwhile, across London at Kensington Palace, Kate was experiencing her own emotional turmoil. She had thrown herself into her royal duties with even more dedication than usual, scheduling extra visits to schools and community centers, meeting with charity representatives, and working late into the evening on correspondence and planning. William had noticed her increased activity, but attributed it to her natural enthusiasm for her work. The truth was that Kate was using busyness as a defense against thoughts she didn't want to entertain. Every time her mind wandered back to that moment in the ballroom, the way Charles had approached her with such gentle familiarity, The look in his eyes when he realized his mistake, the unexpected ease of their conversation afterward. She forced herself to focus on something else, anything else. But, late at night, when the palace grew quiet and her official duties were complete, the memories returned with startling clarity. She found herself remembering not just the incident itself, but everything that had led up to it. The way Charles had moved through the crowd with such purpose, clearly intent on reaching someone he cared about. The tender expression on his face as he approached, thinking he was walking toward Camilla. The intimate nature of the gesture he had been about to make. What troubled Kate most was not the mistake itself, but her own reaction to it. The moment when their eyes had met, she had felt something shift inside her, a recognition of Charles as something more than just her father-in-law or the king. For just an instant, she had seen him as Camilla saw him, as a man capable of deep affection and gentle devotion. These thoughts made Kate feel disloyal not just to William, but to Camilla herself. She had always admired the relationship between Charles and his wife, the way they supported each other through the challenges of royal life, the genuine affection that was visible whenever they were together. The last thing she wanted was to complicate or threaten that bond in any way. A week after the gala, circumstances forced Charles and Kate to spend time together in a way that neither had anticipated. William had been called away unexpectedly to deal with a crisis involving one of his charities, leaving Kate to handle a joint engagement with Charles that had been planned for months. The event was a visit to a new environmental research center that combined Charles's passion for sustainability with Kate's interest in education and youth development. As their car pulled up to the research facility, Charles and Kate sat in comfortable but charged silence. Both were acutely aware that this would be their first extended time alone together since the night of the gala. The presence of security personnel and staff members would prevent any truly private conversation, but the thought of spending hours in each other's company without the buffer of other family members was both exciting and anxiety-provoking. The research center visit began with the usual formalities, greetings from staff, brief presentations about the facility's work, and tours of various laboratories and research areas. Charles and Kate fell into the familiar rhythm of royal engagements, asking thoughtful questions, showing genuine interest in the work being presented, and maintaining the gracious demeanor that such occasions required. But, as the day progressed, both began to notice things about each other that went beyond their public roles. Charles was struck by Kate's intelligence and genuine curiosity about the research being conducted. She asked insightful questions about climate data analysis and renewable energy systems, demonstrating a depth of understanding that impressed both their hosts and Charles himself. Kate, meanwhile, found herself drawn to Charles's passion for environmental issues. She had always known of his commitment to these causes, but seeing him engage directly with researchers and activists revealed a side of him that was both deeply knowledgeable and genuinely caring. His questions were specific and informed, his suggestions practical and innovative. During a break in the formal program, Charles and Kate found themselves momentarily alone in a small conference room while their hosts prepared for the next presentation. The silence stretched between them, filled with the weight of unspoken thoughts and emotions. "This is fascinating work," Kate said finally, gesturing toward the research materials spread across the conference table. "I had no idea how advanced their climate modeling systems had become." "Indeed," Charles replied, moving closer to examine a chart she was studying. "The potential applications for policy development are quite remarkable." As he leaned over to point out a particular data point, his shoulder brushed against hers, sending an unexpected jolt of awareness through both of them. Kate looked up to find Charles's face very close to hers, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. For a moment, the professional environment and the presence of others just outside the door seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of them and the electric connection that had been building since that night at the palace. "Kate," Charles said softly, her name carrying a weight and meaning it had never held before. His voice was gentle but serious, as if he were about to say something important. The way he looked at her made her feel as though he could see directly into her soul. Before either of them could say anything more, their hosts returned to escort them to the next part of the tour. The moment was broken, but its impact lingered as they continued through the facility. Both Charles and Kate were now hyper-aware of each other's presence, noting every glance, every accidental touch, every shared smile or moment of understanding. The remainder of the visit passed in a haze of confused emotions and heightened awareness. They performed their public duties flawlessly, but underneath the surface, both were grappling with feelings that grew stronger rather than weaker as the day progressed. The easy rapport they had always shared as family members had evolved into something more complex and potentially dangerous. As their car carried them back toward London, the conversation remained carefully focused on the day's events and the impressive work being done at the research center. But the subtext was unmistakable. Both Charles and Kate were struggling with an attraction that neither felt free to acknowledge or explore. "Thank you for stepping in today," Charles said as they neared Kensington Palace. "William's absence was unfortunate, but you handled everything beautifully. The researchers were clearly impressed with your knowledge and interest." "It was my pleasure," Kate replied, meaning it more than she cared to admit. "I hope we'll have opportunities to work together on similar projects in the future." The words carried an undertone that had nothing to do with environmental research and everything to do with the desire to spend more time in each other's company. As the car stopped in front of Kensington Palace, Kate prepared to exit, but Charles reached out and gently touched her hand. The contact was brief and could easily have been dismissed as a courteous gesture, but both of them felt its significance. "Kate," he said, his voice low and serious. "About what happened at the gala." "It was nothing," she said quickly, though they both knew this wasn't true. "Just a simple case of mistaken identity and poor lighting. These things happen." Charles nodded, accepting her explanation while knowing it was incomplete. "Of course," he agreed. "Though I hope it didn't make you uncomfortable in any way." "Not at all," Kate assured him, though the slight tremor in her voice suggested otherwise. "We're family, after all. Such things are easily forgotten." But as Kate made her way into the palace and Charles's car continued toward Clarence House, both knew that forgetting would be neither easy nor, perhaps, desirable. The day had only intensified the connection that had begun with a simple mistake in a crowded ballroom. That evening, Kate stood at her bedroom window, looking out at the London skyline and thinking about the day's events. Every rational part of her mind told her to dismiss these feelings as nothing more than a temporary confusion brought on by unusual circumstances. She was happily married to William, a man she loved deeply and who had given her a beautiful life and family. Charles was not only her father-in-law, but the King of England, a man with responsibilities that made any personal complications impossible. Yet despite all the logical arguments her mind could muster, her heart refused to cooperate. The memory of Charles's hand on hers, the intensity in his eyes when he had said her name, the easy companionship they had shared throughout the day, all of it felt too significant to dismiss or ignore. Meanwhile, at Clarence House, Charles sat in his study, ostensibly reviewing briefing papers for the following day's meetings. But his mind kept returning to the same troubling questions. How had his feelings for Kate evolved so quickly from familial affection to something far more complex? What did these feelings mean for his marriage to Camilla, a relationship that had survived so much scrutiny and difficulty? And, perhaps most importantly, what was he prepared to do about emotions that seemed to grow stronger with each passing day? The weeks following their joint engagement at the research center marked a period of careful avoidance for both Charles and Kate. Each seemed determined to maintain appropriate distance while continuing to fulfill their royal duties. However, the very effort they put into avoiding private moments together only served to heighten the tension and make their growing feelings more difficult to ignore. Charles threw himself into his official responsibilities with renewed vigor, accepting additional engagements and extending his working hours well into the evening. His staff, accustomed to his dedicated approach to royal duties, noticed the increased pace but attributed it to his natural sense of obligation rather than any personal motivation. Only his private secretary, Sir Geoffrey Hartwell, who had worked with Charles for over 15 years, sensed that something deeper was driving the king's sudden need to stay constantly busy. "Your Majesty seems to be pushing himself quite hard lately," Sir Geoffrey observed one Thursday morning as they reviewed the packed schedule for the coming week. "Perhaps it would be wise to allow for some rest periods between engagements?" Charles looked up from the papers spread across his desk, momentarily confused by the suggestion. Rest was the last thing he wanted right now. When he wasn't occupied with official business, his thoughts inevitably turned to Kate, replaying their conversations and analyzing every gesture and expression. Work provided the only refuge from the emotional turmoil that threatened to overwhelm him. "I'm quite all right, Geoffrey," Charles replied, returning his attention to the schedule. "There's simply a great deal that requires my attention at present." The Commonwealth trade discussions alone will require extensive preparation. Sir Geoffrey nodded diplomatically, but made a mental note to monitor the king's health and well-being more closely. In his experience, when members of the royal family suddenly changed their patterns of behavior, it usually indicated some underlying stress or concern that they were reluctant to discuss. Meanwhile, Kate had adopted a similar strategy of immersion in her royal duties. She scheduled additional visits to schools and hospitals, increased her involvement with various charities, and even accepted speaking engagements that she would normally have declined due to time constraints. William, increasingly busy with his own responsibilities, was grateful for her dedication, but occasionally worried that she was taking on too much. "You've been incredibly busy lately," William observed one evening as they prepared for bed. "Are you sure you're not overwhelming yourself with commitments? The children have been asking when they'll see more of you." Kate felt a pang of guilt at his words. She had indeed been spending more time away from home, but not entirely for the noble reasons William assumed. The truth was that staying busy and away from Kensington Palace reduced the chances of unexpected encounters with Charles. The fewer opportunities they had to be in the same room, the easier it would be to get these confusing feelings under control. "You're right," she admitted, sitting on the edge of their bed. "I have been accepting more engagements than usual. Perhaps I should scale back a bit and spend more time with the children." The guilt in her voice was unmistakable, though William interpreted it differently than she intended. "I'm not criticizing your dedication," William said gently, moving to sit beside her. "I know how much your charitable work means to you, and I'm proud of everything you're accomplishing. I just want to make sure you're taking care of yourself as well." His kindness and understanding only made Kate feel worse about the secret she was keeping. William trusted her completely, supported her work without question, and loved her unconditionally. The last thing he deserved was a wife whose thoughts were increasingly occupied by another man, even if that man was his own father. The enforced separation between Charles and Kate might have continued indefinitely if not for a family crisis that brought them together in circumstances neither could have anticipated. Princess Anne suffered a riding accident during a visit to Scotland, requiring immediate hospitalization and forcing a reorganization of several important royal engagements. The most significant of these was a state dinner honoring the visiting President of Ireland, an event that had been planned for months and could not be postponed due to diplomatic considerations. With and unable to attend and several other family members already committed to engagements abroad, Charles found himself needing additional support to ensure the dinner proceeded smoothly. Camilla would naturally serve as hostess, but protocol required additional senior family members to assist with the complex social and diplomatic requirements of a state dinner. William was in Canada on an official tour and couldn't return in time, leaving Kate as the logical choice to step in and help with hosting duties. When Charles's private secretary called to request her assistance, Kate's first impulse was to decline, citing prior commitments or other obligations. But she knew that duty to the crown took precedence over personal comfort, and the state dinner was too important to risk diplomatic embarrassment due to inadequate royal representation. "Of course I'll help," she told Sir Geoffrey over the phone, hoping her voice sounded more confident than she felt. "Please send me the guest list and seating arrangements. I'll need to familiarize myself with the diplomatic protocols." "Thank you, Your Royal Highness," Sir Geoffrey replied with obvious relief. "His Majesty will be most grateful for your assistance. I'll have all the necessary briefing materials sent to Kensington Palace immediately." As Kate hung up the phone, she realized that she would soon be spending an entire evening in close proximity to Charles, acting as co-host for one of the most formal and important events on the royal calendar. The thought both thrilled and terrified her in equal measure. The days leading up to the state dinner were filled with intensive preparation. Kate worked closely with the palace protocol office to ensure she understood every aspect of her role, from the proper order of precedence for seating arrangements to the specific timing of each course and ceremony. She also coordinated with the kitchen staff and event planners to ensure that every detail would reflect the high standards expected of such occasions. Throughout this preparation, she found herself working indirectly with Charles through various staff members and briefing documents. Even this limited connection felt charged with significance, as if they were collaborating on something far more intimate than a formal dinner party. Charles, meanwhile, was experiencing his own complex emotions about the upcoming event. On one hand, he was grateful for Kate's willingness to step in during a family crisis and confident in her ability to handle the demanding role of co-hostess. On the other hand, the prospect of spending an entire evening working closely with her, presenting a united front to international dignitaries, felt dangerously intimate. The night of the state dinner arrived with all the pomp and ceremony that such occasions demanded. The state dining room at Buckingham Palace had been transformed into a glittering showcase of British hospitality, with the finest china, crystal, and silver arranged on tables that could accommodate over 100 guests. Flowers from the palace gardens provided elegant centerpieces, and the room glowed with the warm light of numerous candles and chandeliers. Kate arrived at the palace an hour before the guests were expected, dressed in a stunning midnight blue gown that struck the perfect balance between elegance and diplomatic appropriateness. Her jewelry consisted of pieces from the royal collection, chosen specifically to honor the visiting dignitaries while representing the dignity of the British crown. When she entered the state dining room for a final inspection of the arrangements, she found Charles already there, resplendent in his formal dress uniform with the sash and Star of the Order of the Garter. He was conferring quietly with the master of the household about some last-minute details when he noticed her arrival. For a moment, they simply looked at each other across the magnificent room, both acutely aware that this was their first significant time together since that charged afternoon at the research center. The formal setting and their elegant attire somehow made the moment feel even more intense, as if they were actors about to perform in a play whose script they had never fully read. "Kate," Charles said, crossing the room toward her with a warm smile that she could see was carefully controlled. "You look absolutely lovely. Thank you again for stepping in tonight. I know how much this means to the success of the evening." "It's my honor," Kate replied, offering a graceful curtsy that felt both natural and oddly intimate given their history. "Everything looks perfect. The arrangements are truly beautiful." "Indeed they are," Charles agreed, though his eyes remained focused on her face rather than the elaborate table settings. "Shall we review the receiving line procedures once more before our guests arrive?" For the next 30 minutes, they went through the complex choreography that would govern the evening's events. They practiced the proper positions for greeting each dignitary, reviewed the key talking points for conversations with various guests, and confirmed the timing for toasts and speeches. To any observer, they appeared to be simply two professional members of the royal family preparing for an important diplomatic function. But, beneath the surface, both Charles and Kate were intensely aware of each other's presence. When Charles guided her through the proper positioning for formal photographs, his hand on her elbow sent electricity through her entire arm. When Kate adjusted his sash slightly to ensure it lay perfectly straight, her gentle touch made his breath catch audibly. As the first guests began to arrive, Charles and Kate took their positions in the grand reception room, flanking Camilla, who would lead the receiving line as queen consort. The next 3 hours would test their ability to maintain professional composure while working together in the most public and scrutinized environment possible. The evening proceeded with clockwork precision. Charles and Kate moved through their hosting duties with the polished grace that years of royal training had instilled in them. They greeted dignitaries with appropriate warmth, facilitated conversations between guests who shared common interests, and ensured that the complex protocols of international diplomacy were observed flawlessly. But, for both of them, the most memorable moments came during the brief interludes when their duties brought them together. When Charles needed to consult with her about seating changes due to a late arrival, their quiet conversation felt intensely private despite the roomful of observers. When Kate needed his guidance on a point of protocol regarding Irish customs, his detailed explanation was delivered with a gentleness that went far beyond mere courtesy. During the dinner itself, Kate was seated several places away from Charles at the head table, but she found her eyes drawn to him repeatedly throughout the meal. She watched as he engaged the Irish president's wife in animated conversation about Celtic art, his obvious knowledge and genuine interest making him an excellent ambassador for British cultural appreciation. She noticed how he listened intently when others spoke, how his smile reached his eyes when something genuinely amused him, how naturally he made everyone around him feel welcome and valued. Charles, too, found himself stealing glances at Kate throughout the dinner. He watched as she charmed the Irish foreign minister with her questions about educational initiatives in rural communities, her sincere interest clearly making a positive impression. He observed how gracefully she handled a minor crisis when wine was accidentally spilled near her place setting, turning a potentially awkward moment into an opportunity to put her dinner companions at ease with humor and kindness. The evening's climax came during the exchange of toasts between the two nations. Charles rose to deliver the formal toast on behalf of Britain, his words carefully crafted to honor the visiting delegation while strengthening diplomatic ties between the two countries. His speech was eloquent and heartfelt, touching on shared history, common values, and hopes for future cooperation. As he spoke, Kate found herself seeing him not as her father-in-law or as the king, but as a man of deep intelligence and genuine caring for others. His words revealed a breadth of knowledge about Irish history and culture that impressed even the visiting dignitaries. But, more than that, they revealed his sincere desire to build bridges and create understanding between peoples. When the Irish president rose to respond with his own toast, he specifically mentioned the gracious hospitality of the entire royal family, noting how honored his delegation felt to be welcomed so warmly. His words included specific praise for Kate's knowledge and interest in educational matters, comments that made Charles feel a surge of pride in her accomplishments. As the formal dinner concluded and guests moved to adjoining rooms for coffee and informal conversation, Charles and Kate found themselves working together to ensure that all diplomatic protocols were properly observed. They coordinated the timing of departures, made sure that important guests had opportunities for private conversations with key officials, and maintained the careful balance of attention that such events required. Finally, as the last guests departed and the palace staff began the enormous task of clearing and cleaning, Charles and Kate stood together in the state dining room, surrounded by the remnants of a successful diplomatic triumph. Both were exhausted but exhilarated by the evening's success, and both were acutely aware that their time together was coming to an end. "That was beautifully done," Charles said softly, his formal bearing relaxing slightly now that they were alone. "Your contributions made all the difference to the evening's success. The Irish delegation was clearly impressed by your knowledge and warmth." "Thank you," Kate replied, feeling genuinely moved by his praise. "It was an honor to work with you. I've never seen diplomatic hosting done so skillfully. You made everyone feel genuinely welcome while still maintaining the appropriate formality." They stood facing each other in the magnificent room, both still in their formal evening wear, both aware that this moment represented something significant in their relationship. The successful collaboration had only intensified their connection, proving that they could work together with an ease and understanding that transcended their family relationships. The success of the state dinner marked a turning point in the delicate situation between Charles and Kate. Rather than providing closure or resolution, the evening had only deepened their connection and made their feelings more difficult to ignore. Both had witnessed each other at their professional best, working together with an ease and understanding that felt natural yet dangerous given their circumstances. In the days following the dinner, neither Charles nor Kate could stop thinking about their collaboration. The memory of working together so seamlessly, of understanding each other's needs and responses almost intuitively, created a sense of partnership that went far beyond their family relationship or their shared royal duties. Charles found himself replaying conversations from the evening, remembering not just the words Kate had spoken to dignitaries and guests, but the way she had looked at him when seeking guidance, the small smile she had given him when a particularly difficult protocol moment had gone smoothly, the grace with which she had handled every challenge the evening had presented. Kate, meanwhile, was struggling with emotions that seemed to grow stronger rather than weaker with time. The evening had shown her a side of Charles that she had only glimpsed before: his intelligence, his diplomatic skill, his genuine care for others, and, most troublingly, his natural ability to make her feel valued and understood in ways that went beyond mere courtesy. The situation was complicated further by the praise they both received for the dinner's success. Newspaper coverage of the event had been overwhelmingly positive, with particular mention of the seamless way the royal family had handled the diplomatic requirements despite the last-minute changes necessitated by Princess Anne's accident. Several articles specifically noted the excellent impression Kate had made on the Irish delegation and her obvious comfort with high-level diplomatic entertaining. Camilla, reading these accounts over breakfast, felt genuine pride in her family's accomplishments. "The coverage has been wonderful," she told Charles as they shared their morning meal at Clarence's house. "Kate really did beautifully, didn't she? I'm so proud of how she's grown into her role." "Indeed," Charles agreed, though he noticed that his voice carried more warmth than such a comment typically warranted. "She handled the evening with remarkable grace and intelligence." The Irish delegation was clearly impressed. Camilla looked at him with mild curiosity. There was something in his tone when he spoke about Kate that seemed different from his usual family pride. She couldn't quite identify what it was, but it made her pay closer attention to his expressions and responses. I hope we'll have more opportunities for such collaboration, Charles continued, then immediately regretted the comment when he saw Camilla's eyebrows raise slightly. Collaboration? She asked, her voice carefully neutral. That's an interesting way to describe family members supporting each other during a crisis. Charles felt heat rise in his cheeks as he realized how his words must have sounded. I simply meant that Kate's diplomatic skills are clearly quite advanced, he said, attempting to clarify. She could be a valuable asset in future state occasions. Camilla nodded slowly, but Charles could see that his explanation hadn't entirely satisfied her curiosity. Her intuition, sharpened by years of navigating complex social and political situations, was telling her that there was more to Charles's interest in Kate than professional appreciation. 3 weeks after the state dinner, circumstances conspired to bring Charles and Kate together again in a way that neither had anticipated. William's charitable foundation was hosting a major fundraising event focused on mental health initiatives, a cause that had become central to both his and Kate's public work. However, a sudden illness forced William to withdraw from the event at the last minute, leaving Kate to handle the hosting duties alone. When Charles learned of the situation, he immediately offered to attend the event in William's place, explaining that the cause was too important to risk diminishing its impact due to inadequate royal representation. His offer was gratefully accepted by the foundation's organizers, but it meant that he and Kate would once again find themselves working closely together on a high-profile public engagement. The event was scheduled to take place at the Natural History Museum in London, with its stunning Victorian architecture providing an elegant backdrop for an evening that would bring together mental health advocates, medical professionals, celebrities, and major donors. The goal was to raise both funds and awareness for expanded mental health services, particularly for young people facing crisis situations. Kate arrived at the museum an hour before the guests were expected, wearing a deep purple gown that had been chosen to reflect the event's serious purpose while maintaining appropriate elegance for a formal fundraising occasion. She was immediately swept into final preparations, reviewing guest lists, confirming speaking arrangements, and ensuring that the evening's program would proceed smoothly. When Charles arrived 30 minutes later, resplendent in formal evening wear with medals that reflected his long service to various charitable causes, Kate felt the now familiar jolt of awareness that his presence always provoked. He moved through the museum's grand hall with natural authority, greeting staff and organizers with warmth while quickly familiarizing himself with the evening's requirements. Kate, he said, approaching her near the museum's famous central staircase. I hope my last-minute addition to the program won't cause any complications. I'm here purely to support the cause and to stand in for William as needed. Not at all, Kate replied, though her slightly breathless tone suggested that his presence affected her more than she wanted to admit. We're grateful for your support. The cause is too important for personal considerations to interfere. As they spoke, both were aware that her last comment had unintended implications. Personal considerations were indeed interfering, but not in the way their professional obligations required them to acknowledge publicly. The next 2 hours tested their ability to maintain appropriate boundaries while working together to ensure the event's success. They moved through the evening's activities with practiced coordination, greeting guests, facilitating introductions between donors and charity representatives, and maintaining the careful balance between serious advocacy and social entertainment that such events required. During the formal program, Charles delivered a heartfelt speech about the importance of mental health support, drawing on his own long-standing advocacy for holistic approaches to healthcare and his understanding of the unique pressures faced by young people in contemporary society. His words were informed, passionate, and deeply moving, reflecting genuine concern for those struggling with mental health challenges. Kate listened to his speech with growing admiration and emotion. His obvious knowledge of the subject, combined with his sincere commitment to helping others, revealed depths of caring and intelligence that she found increasingly difficult to resist. When he mentioned the courage required to seek help during mental health crises, his eyes briefly met hers across the crowded room, creating a moment of connection that felt intensely personal despite the public setting. Following the formal speeches, Kate delivered her own remarks, focusing on the specific needs of young mothers dealing with postnatal depression and anxiety. Her words were personal and powerful, clearly drawing on her own experiences and deep research into the subject. She spoke with authority and compassion about the isolation and fear that many women experience, and the critical importance of accessible, non-judgmental support services. Charles found himself deeply moved by her speech, not just by its content, but by the obvious passion and knowledge behind her words. He watched as she connected with the audience, making complex medical and social issues understandable and compelling for a diverse group of listeners. Her ability to translate personal experience into effective advocacy impressed him tremendously and only deepened his growing feelings for her. As the formal program concluded and guests moved into social conversation and networking, Charles and Kate found themselves naturally gravitating toward each other. They moved through the crowd together, introducing each other to various advocates and donors, facilitating conversations that would advance the cause they both cared about. During a brief lull in the social demands, they found themselves momentarily alone near one of the museum's spectacular mineral displays. The lighting was soft and warm, creating an intimate atmosphere despite the grand public setting. "Your speech was remarkable," Charles said quietly, his voice carrying an intensity that went beyond polite praise. "The way you connected with people made them understand the real human impact of these issues. It was genuinely moving." "Thank you," Kate replied, her eyes meeting his with an openness that she hadn't allowed herself before. "Your speech was equally powerful. I had no idea how deeply you'd studied these issues, or how personally committed you are to them." They stood facing each other in the soft lighting, surrounded by the museum's treasures, both acutely aware that their conversation had moved beyond professional courtesy into something more personal and dangerous. The formal setting and the presence of guests nearby provided a facade of propriety, but both could feel the emotional current flowing between them. "Kate," Charles said softly, her name carrying a weight and meaning that made her heart race. "I need to tell you something." "Charles," she interrupted gently, her voice barely above a whisper. "Perhaps we shouldn't." "I know we shouldn't," he agreed, moving slightly closer. "But I can't continue pretending that what I feel for you is simply familial affection or professional admiration." The admission hung in the air between them, finally giving voice to the tension that had been building for weeks. Kate felt her breath catch as she processed his words, realizing that her own confused feelings were shared and reciprocated in ways that both thrilled and terrified her. "This is impossible," she whispered, though she made no move to step away from him. "You're married to Camilla. I'm married to William. We have families, responsibilities, duties that make this." "I know," Charles said, his voice heavy with the weight of those responsibilities. "I know all the reasons why this is impossible, why we can't act on these feelings. But I also know that I can't continue pretending they don't exist." Kate looked into his eyes and saw the same conflict that was tearing at her own heart. The attraction between them had grown far beyond anything either had expected or wanted, creating a situation that threatened everything they both held dear. "What are we going to do?" she asked, her voice small and uncertain in a way that revealed just how lost she felt in the face of these impossible emotions. "I don't know," Charles admitted, his honesty both refreshing and heartbreaking. "I only know that I can't bear the thought of pretending anymore, of maintaining careful distance when all I want is to be near you." Before either could say anything more, they were interrupted by one of the event organizers who needed Kate's attention for photographs with major donors. The moment was broken, but its impact would linger long after the evening ended. For the remainder of the event, Charles and Kate maintained their professional facade, while both grappled with the implications of what had just been acknowledged between them. They had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed, moving from unspoken attraction to open admission of feelings that had the potential to destroy multiple lives and relationships. As the evening concluded and guests began to depart, Charles and Kate found themselves once again working together to ensure proper protocol was observed and that important connections made during the event were properly followed up. But underneath the professional cooperation was a new awareness of each other that made every interaction feel charged with significance. When the last guests had left and the museum staff began the process of restoration, Charles and Kate stood together in the grand hall, both exhausted by the emotional demands of the evening as much as by its professional requirements. "We can't continue like this," Kate said finally, her voice heavy with exhaustion and emotion. "Tonight proved that we can't trust ourselves to maintain appropriate boundaries." "You're right," Charles agreed, though every part of him rebelled against the idea of returning to careful avoidance and professional distance. But I'm not sure I know how to go back to seeing you simply as William's wife or simply as a fellow working royal. They looked at each other across the museum's magnificent space, both understanding that they had reached a crossroads that would require difficult decisions. The feelings between them were real and powerful, but so were their obligations to their families and to the institution they both served. "We need time to think," Kate said finally. "Time apart to gain perspective and figure out how to handle this situation responsibly." Charles nodded, knowing she was right even as the prospect of voluntary separation felt like a physical pain. "Perhaps some distance would be wise," he agreed. "Though I'm not sure how we can avoid each other entirely given our family connections and royal duties." As they prepared to leave the museum separately, both understood that their relationship had fundamentally changed. The innocent mistake at the charity gala had evolved into something far more complex and potentially destructive, forcing them to confront feelings that challenged everything they thought they knew about duty, loyalty, and love. The month following their emotional conversation at the Natural History Museum became a period of careful choreography for both Charles and Kate. Each worked desperately to maintain professional distance while fulfilling their royal obligations. But the very effort required to avoid meaningful contact only served to underscore the intensity of their feelings. Charles found himself analyzing his calendar with unusual attention, noting which events might bring him into contact with Kate, and developing strategies to minimize their interaction without appearing deliberately avoidant. His staff noticed his increased attention to scheduling details, but attributed it to his naturally methodical approach to royal duties. Kate employed similar tactics, declining invitations to events where Charles would be present and requesting detailed advance information about guest lists and seating arrangements for occasions she couldn't avoid. Her staff assumed she was simply being more thorough in her preparation, not realizing she was trying to manage her own emotional well-being. However, their attempts to maintain distance were complicated by the very nature of their roles within the royal family. As King and Princess of Wales, they were often expected to appear at the same functions, support similar causes, and participate in family gatherings that made complete avoidance impossible. The situation reached a crisis point during preparations for the annual Commonwealth Day service at Westminster Abbey. This was one of the most important events on the royal calendar, requiring the participation of senior family members in a highly choreographed ceremony that would be watched by millions around the world. Camilla had been working closely with palace staff to coordinate the complex arrangements when she noticed something troubling in the preliminary seating charts. Charles had specifically requested that his usual seat next to her during the procession be modified to place several other family members between him and Kate's position. When questioned about this unusual request, he had given vague explanations about improving the visual balance of the procession. Camilla's intuition, already alerted by Charles's recent behavior, immediately recognized that there was more to this request than aesthetic concerns. She had been married to Charles long enough to know when he was avoiding something or someone, and his recent distracted behavior suddenly began to make more sense. That evening, Camilla confronted Charles directly in their private sitting room at Clarence House. She had spent the day thinking carefully about how to approach the subject, knowing that whatever was troubling her husband required delicate handling. "Charles," she said, setting aside her evening correspondence and turning to face him directly, "I think we need to have an honest conversation about what's been bothering you these past weeks." Charles looked up from his briefing papers, immediately alert to the serious tone in his wife's voice. He had been dreading this moment, knowing that Camilla's perceptive nature would eventually lead her to recognize that something significant was wrong. "I'm not sure what you mean," he said carefully, though they both knew this response was inadequate. "I mean," Camilla continued gently but firmly, "your obvious efforts to avoid being near Kate at public events. Your distracted behavior since that charity gala. Your sudden need to rearrange seating charts and modify well-established protocols. Something is clearly troubling you, and I think it involves our daughter-in-law." The directness of her observation left Charles with no room for continued evasion. He set aside his papers and looked at his wife, seeing in her eyes not accusation or anger, but the loving concern that had sustained their relationship through so many previous challenges. "Camilla," he began, his voice heavy with the weight of what he was about to confess, "I need you to know that nothing inappropriate has happened between Kate and me. Nothing physical, nothing that would compromise our marriage or her marriage to William. But," Camilla prompted gently, recognizing that his statement implied there was more to the story. But I have developed feelings for her that go beyond what's appropriate for our family relationship, Charles continued, the words feeling both liberating and devastating as he finally spoke them aloud. It began with a simple case of mistaken identity at the gala, and it has grown into something that I can no longer ignore or rationalize away. Camilla absorbed this information with the same grace she had shown throughout their marriage when confronting difficult truths. Her face showed pain, but also a kind of resigned understanding, as if she had suspected something like this but had hoped she was wrong. Does she return these feelings? Camilla asked, her voice steady despite the obvious difficulty of the question. I believe so, Charles admitted, the honesty feeling both cruel and necessary. We've acknowledged the situation between us, but we've both agreed that acting on these feelings would be impossible given our circumstances. They sat in silence for several minutes, both processing the implications of this confession. Charles felt simultaneously relieved to have shared his burden and guilty for causing his wife such pain. Camilla wrestled with emotions ranging from hurt to understanding to concern for the broader implications of the situation. What do you want to do about this? Camilla asked finally, her practical nature asserting itself even in the face of personal crisis. I don't know, Charles replied honestly. I love you, Camilla. I value our marriage and our life together. But I also can't seem to control these feelings for Kate, and I'm terrified of what that means for our family and for the monarchy itself. Camilla nodded slowly, understanding the complexity of their situation perhaps better than anyone else could. Their own relationship had developed in difficult circumstances, had survived intense public scrutiny and family opposition, and had ultimately led to a marriage that had brought them both happiness and fulfillment. She knew better than most how powerful and disruptive unexpected feelings could be. Charles, she said finally, her voice gentle but firm. You need to understand that this situation affects more than just your feelings or even our marriage. Kate is William's wife, the mother of future heirs to the throne. Any scandal involving her could damage the monarchy in ways that would take decades to repair. I understand that, Charles said, his voice reflecting the weight of those responsibilities. It's part of what makes this situation so impossible. I can't act on these feelings without potentially destroying everything we've worked to build and protect. Meanwhile, unaware of this conversation taking place across London, Kate was struggling with her own crisis of conscience. She had confided in no one about her feelings for Charles, but the weight of keeping such a secret was becoming increasingly difficult to bear. Her behavior had become strained and artificial, particularly around William, as she struggled to maintain normal family relationships while grappling with emotions that felt like a betrayal of everything she held dear. The situation came to a head when William, always sensitive to Kate's moods and needs, finally confronted her about her recent behavior. He had noticed her increased nervousness, her tendency to become lost in thought, and her apparent reluctance to discuss certain royal events or family gatherings. Kate, he said one evening as they prepared for bed, I'm worried about you. You've seemed quite stressed lately, and I can't help but feel that there's something you're not telling me. Kate felt her heart race as she faced the prospect of either lying directly to her husband or confessing feelings that would devastate their marriage. She had always prided herself on honesty in their relationship, but the truth in this case seemed too dangerous to reveal. I've just been feeling overwhelmed by all the royal obligations, she said, which was true as far as it went. Sometimes the pressure and the public scrutiny feel quite intense. William nodded sympathetically, accepting her explanation while continuing to sense that there was more to her distress. Is there anything specific that's been particularly difficult? Any events or situations that have been especially stressful? The question was innocent enough, but it forced Kate to confront how many of her recent stresses had been connected to Charles and their complicated relationship. She couldn't mention the charity gala, the research center visit, the state dinner, or the mental health fundraiser without risking exposure of feelings she wasn't prepared to discuss. Just the usual challenges of balancing public duties with family life, she said, hating herself for the deception even as she recognized its necessity. I sometimes worry that I'm not living up to the expectations that come with my position. William moved closer to her, his concern and love evident in his expression. Kate, you're an extraordinary princess of Wales and an amazing mother to our children. Whatever pressures you're feeling, we can work through them together. You don't have to carry these burdens alone. his kindness and support only deepened Kate's guilt about the secret she was keeping. William trusted her completely, believed in their partnership, and was offering exactly the kind of understanding and communication that their marriage had always been built on. The contrast between his openness and her deception felt like a physical weight on her chest. 2 days later, the Commonwealth Day service proceeded as planned, with Charles and Kate maintaining careful professional distance throughout the ceremony. To outside observers, their behavior was perfectly appropriate, but the effort required to avoid meaningful eye contact or extended conversation was exhausting for both of them. Following the service, there was a reception for Commonwealth dignitaries and officials, requiring Charles and Kate to move through the same social spaces while maintaining their facade of normal family relationships. The strain of this performance, combined with the emotional weight of their respective conversations with their spouses, created an atmosphere of barely controlled tension. During a brief moment when they found themselves standing near each other while greeting guests, Kate spoke quietly, without looking directly at Charles. "We can't continue like this," she murmured, her voice barely audible above the conversation around them. "The pretense is becoming impossible to maintain." "I know," Charles replied, his own voice tight with strain. "Camilla knows about my feelings. I had to tell her." Kate's eyes widened in shock and alarm. "What did she say? What does this mean for all of us?" "We need to talk," Charles said, his formal smile never wavering despite the intensity of their whispered conversation. "Properly and privately. This situation requires decisions that we can't make while pretending everything is normal." They arranged to meet 3 days later at a private estate in the Cotswolds that belonged to a discreet family friend who was traveling abroad. The location would provide the privacy they needed for a conversation that could determine the future of their relationship and potentially affect the stability of the monarchy itself. As Kate drove through the countryside toward this clandestine meeting, she felt as though she were approaching a point of no return. The decisions made in the next few hours would either provide a path forward that preserved their marriages and family relationships, or would force them to confront choices that could destroy everything they had built their lives around. Charles arrived at the estate first, using an unmarked car and minimal security to avoid attracting attention. As he waited in the drawing room of the elegant but modest country house, he reflected on how different his life might have been if he had met Kate under different circumstances, in a different time, without the complications of family relationships and royal responsibilities. When Kate arrived, still dressed in the simple country clothes she had worn to avoid recognition, they faced each other with the full weight of their situation finally acknowledged between them. No more pretense, no more careful avoidance, no more professional facades. Just two people who had developed powerful feelings for each other in circumstances that made those feelings potentially devastating. "I've been thinking about what Camilla said," Charles began, his voice serious but gentle, "about the damage this situation could cause to the monarchy, to our families, to the institution we've both devoted our lives to serving." "I've been thinking the same thing," Kate replied, settling into a chair across from him. "William trusts me completely, and I'm betraying that trust every day that I don't tell him about my feelings. Camilla deserves better than a husband whose heart is elsewhere. And the children, both yours and mine, deserve better than parents who are living a lie." They talked for hours, exploring every aspect of their situation with the thoroughness that such momentous decisions required. They discussed the possibility of confessing everything to their spouses and seeking forgiveness while committing to maintaining appropriate boundaries. They considered whether one or both of them should step back from their royal duties to minimize future contact. They even explored the unthinkable possibility of pursuing their feelings regardless of the consequences. As the afternoon sunlight faded into evening, they reached a conclusion that was both heartbreaking and inevitable. Their feelings for each other were real and powerful, but the cost of acting on those feelings would be too high for everyone involved. The damage to their marriages, their families, and the monarchy itself would be irreparable. "We have to end this," Kate said finally, tears streaming down her face. "Not just the physical proximity, but the emotional connection. We have to find a way to return to seeing each other as family members, and nothing more." Charles nodded, his own eyes bright with unshed tears. "I know you're right. But I also know that I'll never forget these feelings or the connection we've shared. That has to be enough, the knowledge that something beautiful existed, even if it couldn't be pursued." Their final conversation lasted until well after dark, as they worked through the practical arrangements that would allow them to maintain their royal duties while minimizing the emotional strain on their relationship. They would return to their marriages with renewed commitment, focusing on the love and partnerships that had brought them happiness before this complication arose. As Kate prepared to leave, Charles reached for her hand one final time. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for showing me depths of feeling I didn't know I was capable of. And thank you for being strong enough to choose duty over desire." Kate squeezed his hand gently, memorizing the feeling for what they both knew would be the last time. "Thank you for making me feel valued and understood in ways I never expected. I'll treasure that gift, even as we return to our separate lives." They parted that evening with the understanding that their relationship had been forever changed, but also with the commitment to honor their greater responsibilities. The memory of their connection would remain, but it would be transformed from an active emotional crisis into a cherished but private remembrance of what might have been under different circumstances.